Well, if you weren't with us last Sunday, we began our Christmas sermon series called Socks and Underwear. And it's a bit different, maybe, from other sermon series that we've done over Christmas in the past, but there's an important message here for us nonetheless. The premise of the series is basically this, that when God sent his son, Jesus, into this world to be born as a baby and to grow up, to die for our sins and rise again, that like socks and underwear or soap and shampoo or face cloths and towels and the like that we receive under the tree at Christmas time, God was not giving us what we necessarily wanted, but instead what we most need. You see, our greatest need is not for more stuff. It isn't for position or power or money or good looks or all of the other things that we find ourselves aimlessly running after. Our greatest need is the vast chasm of separation that exists between us and God, and that prevents us from being the people that God originally created us to be. We were made to thrive. We were made to be whole, to care for one another in creation, and all of that has come apart at the seams. And every day, in 1,000 different ways, we see evidence of this in the news and in our communities and even in our homes. Everything that is wrong with the world can be traced back to what is wrong between us and God. But God, through Jesus, has stepped in to cross the divide. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas. We celebrate God taking the initiative to come to us through his son Jesus so that we might be right with him again. That is our greatest need. But many people, including likely many of us, still want to live in the land of want. We want God to give us what we want, not what it is that we need. We want God when it's convenient. When life stinks, we want him to make it smell like roses. When our sin leads to a pile of hurt in our lives, we want him to get us out of the mess, yes, most certainly, but we don't want him messing with our lives in any big ways. We want to be able to haul God down off the shelf from time to time, but not really take seriously our great need of transformation that needs to take place in our lives. We want a convenient God, not an interfering, meddling one that we can't control and keep in his place. But I hope this Christmas, as we work through this series together, that we can learn to appreciate a little more how in Jesus God meets our need, our deepest need. God doesn't always give us what we want, but he does give us what we need. And that's very true this morning as we look at one of the many things that God has given us in Jesus. When I think about Christmas and I think about what are those things that I get year after year after year that I might not necessarily want, or those things that didn't quite make my Christmas list, but once I receive them, I realize it's something I really need and use quite often. One of those things is a flashlight. Flashlight. How many of you get a flashlight every year, either in your stocking or under the Christmas tree? A lot of us maybe get a flashlight. I always get a flashlight every year. And flashlights are very important in our house. We have chickens. My wife Lisa keeps chickens, and 2 ducks as well, Howard and Hazel. And usually it's late in the evening by the time that we get out to the buildings to make sure that everything is okay and collect the eggs. And without fail, night after night, a flashlight goes out with us to help light the way. And where we live, just outside of town, out on the Brooklyn Road, we've discovered since living there that the power is a little less reliable than it is here in town. At least 3 or 4 times a year, we're without power. So those flashlights that we get come in real handy in those cases as well. So while a flashlight may not be at the top of my Christmas list, someone every year seems to end up getting me one, and the reality is the flashlight really is something that I need and I use a lot. And the Bible tells us that that God sent Jesus into this world to function in our lives in a very similar way. To shine light in our lives like a flashlight. And one of the things then that God gives us in Jesus that we need is light. If you have your Bibles with you, would you turn with me to John chapter 1, verses 1 to 13. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 13. And if you don't, the scripture reading for this morning will be on the screen. So John chapter 1, 1 to 13. And this is what we read here. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was with God in the beginning. Now, to understand this text, we need to understand that when John speaks of the Word here, he's talking about Jesus. So this text is telling us that Jesus didn't just appear out of thin air one day, but as God's Son, He was with God from the beginning, and in fact is God. So let's keep going here. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John, and he came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. I want us to try and understand what this text has to say to us this morning about Jesus the light. And the first thing I want us to notice is that the light that John speaks of here in this text is indeed a person. Verse 4 says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The image of light in relation to God is not something that's unique to Christianity. Many of the world's religions draw upon this concept of light and darkness in their sacred texts in their attempt to understand God and the world. A light is often seen as a metaphor for good, for truth, for wisdom. And some will suggest that this light is found within us, looking inward for the inner light that will bring peace and enlightenment to our lives. Others will speak of light as being engaged in a cosmic struggle with darkness, with the two locked in conflict with one another. Others speak of light as a force that permeates and binds all things together. You'll find for you Star Wars fans out there. In the Star Wars movies, the Force, which is a life force that flows through and in all things. But here John tells us in this text, this image of light is used in a very different way. John would say, and we would say, that light is a person, and this person's name is Jesus. Light is not to be found by looking within ourselves. The prophet Jeremiah makes this very clear when he says that's actually the last place we want to look. He says the heart is hopelessly dark and deceitful. And light is not some nebulous force that exists in the world that flows in and through all things and is locked in some cosmic battle with darkness where the outcome is uncertain. No, as John proclaims in our text this morning, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus is the light. Light is a person, not a thing, not a force, not in us, but as Jesus says of himself in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In Jesus is truth. In Jesus is real moral goodness. In Jesus is true wisdom. He is the light. Now this light that is inherent in Jesus and in him alone has a function or has a purpose that John tells us. Why does Jesus shine his light in our lives? Why is he the light to all humanity, as John tells us? Why does he shine light in the darkness of this world, in the darkness of our hearts? And there are two reasons. The first is found in the text that we've read. Verses 9 to 11 read, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And he was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or husband's will, but born of God." So Jesus came to give light to the world for a purpose. And that purpose is evident here in these verses. It is to illuminate our pathway to God. Like a flashlight on a path that is cloaked in darkness, Jesus has come to show us the way to God, the way back into relationship with him. But here's the unique thing about Jesus. Not only does he illuminate the way to God, but he is the way to God. Verse 12 says, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." Jesus himself said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." We live in what some have described as a secular age. An age whereby many folks have decided that they can do without God in their lives. And yet, strangely enough, many people, while they may not say that they are religious, would still consider themselves spiritual, which doesn't really seem all that secular after all. They're still looking for God, just not in the places that they used to look. They're looking within, looking in nature, looking for God in sex or relationships with others. In Jesus' day, people were looking for God too. They were looking for God in their own goodness, in their strict observance of religious laws. In the non-Jewish world, they were looking for God in the veneration of idols and emperor worship. And so John tells us, when the true light came into the world, when Jesus came, some were so convinced that they had it all figured out, that their pathway led to God, that the world didn't recognize him. In fact, he went to his very own people. And John tells us he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. See, many folks think that they found the pathway to God, their own pathway to God. But in reality, they're feeling around in the darkness lost. I remember when I was a teenager, I joined the local fire department. And one of our training exercises was to find our way through a maze in the dark. And a maze would be constructed out of lobster crates on the floor of a large building, so that you had this small little tunnel that you had to find your way through in the maze in the dark. Now, of course, if you got lost, some of the lights would be turned on, and it was easy to find your way. But in the darkness, it was just groping around in the darkness blind, with our fire gear on and our breathing pack on. And some folks would even be overcome by claustrophobia trying to find their way through that tight little space. And John wants us to understand this morning that the light, Jesus, has come into this dark world to illuminate the way to God for us. We don't need to grope around in the darkness any longer. There is a pathway that leads to God, and when we walk that pathway, we find him. And in fact, John tells us that not only do we find God, but we are reconciled to him and adopted into his family as one of his children. But John is also very clear that there's only one pathway, one way to God, and that's through belief or faith in Jesus. We come to God through Jesus. There is light shining this morning, lighting the pathway to God, and this light has a name. His name is Jesus. But if that's so, we might think that the whole world will be running down this illuminated pathway to God. But that isn't the case, is it? And I think this might be due in part to the second function that Jesus the light plays in our lives. In this sermon series, we're talking about the things that God gives us in sending His Son Jesus that we don't necessarily want, but that we need. And my guess is that for most of us, out of all the things we're going to talk about at this Christmas, that God gives us in Jesus, that we don't necessarily want, but we need. It is Jesus' role as the one who shines light in our lives, that is maybe the one that we don't want most of all, because of this next part that we're going to talk about. You see, light has another role in our lives, besides simply lighting pathways or illuminating ways ahead. Light also reveals. Think of a prison with big spotlights shining back and forth. Those aren't there to light the way for anyone. Those are there to reveal if someone tries to escape. Or think of a burglar slipping around, sneaking around the house at night, trying not to be seen, and then all of a sudden the lights are flicked on and their cover is blown. Or think of the times as a teenager maybe, and you and your honey are out for a drive at night, and you end up in a secluded little spot, pulled over for a little smoochy, and you hear a rap on the window and a bright light shining in as the police officer tells you you need to move on because this is private property. Light reveals. And often it reveals things that we would rather have remained hidden. Light can be our friend when it lights the pathway ahead, but it can be our enemy when it reveals what we would rather hide. And over in chapter 3 of John, John reveals for us this aspect of light that Jesus brings to our lives. He writes this in John chapter 3, starting in verse 19. He says, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." John says here that Jesus' light has come into the world, but instead of embracing the light, many people run from it, because the truth is that our hearts are dark, they're full of evil, and at all costs we want that darkness to remain hidden. I mean, this is true, isn't it? I mean, most of us want other people to believe that we are good, decent, ordinary, upstanding people, don't we? I mean, that's the image that we want to project. All of us have worked hard, in fact, to craft and project an image of ourselves to the world that others will like. But the unsettling thing is that we all know the truth about ourselves, don't we? We all know what lurks beneath the surface. The darkness that we pretend really isn't there, but if we allow ourselves to be honest, it really is. There are things in our lives that we protect at all costs. Things that we guard closely for fear that they might be exposed and somebody else might find out. And then here comes Jesus, strolling along with his stupid flashlight, rapping on the window. "Hey, Danny, did you see that? Do you realize, Danny, that that is in your life? Hey, Danny, what you got hidden over in the corner there anyway, under that blanket? Well, why don't we go over, Danny, and have a look? Hey, Danny, what is that foul odor coming from behind that door? Just a minute. Let me grab my light, and we'll open it up, and we'll see." We just want to scream, "Jesus, put that light away. There's nothing to see here. Surely there's somebody else's life worse off than mine that you can go poke around in." Why do so many people run from Jesus, the light who illuminates the pathway to God? Because the same light also shines in the dark places of our lives and reveals the sin and the darkness that we've been trying at all costs to remain hidden. That's why so many people choose to settle for a cheap version of Jesus rather than the real thing. A Jesus whose only function is to illuminate our pathway to God, to get us to heaven, but never affect change in our lives. Never deal with any of the sin and the garbage inside. A Jesus who loves us just the way that we are and wouldn't change a thing about us because we are such perfect beings right now. But folks, I want to be very clear about who Jesus really is, in case we've bought into a very different Jesus than the one revealed in the Bible. Jesus the light both illuminates and reveals. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a Jesus who lights the way to God and not have a Jesus who also shines light on and reveals the dark places in our lives. They are one and the same Jesus. And so to embrace Jesus, to follow him, to yes, follow him as he leads us into a relationship with God, also we need to open our lives to his revealing light as he begins to deal with the mess of sin in us. And for our sake, that's a very, very good thing. Because as we finish this morning, we need to see the grace and the love behind the light that Jesus shines in our lives. God shines the light of Jesus in our lives, not so that he can rub it in our faces, not so that he can tease us with what is revealed in the darkness, but so that we might see the truth about the ugliness of sin that we harbor in our darkness in our lives, and that he might shine light on the pathway that leads to life, that leads to God, that leads to freedom from the ugliness of sin that was revealed hiding there in our lives. See, we've all got stuff. Every single one of us. We've all got stuff hiding away in the dark. Stuff only you and God know about. Stuff we're afraid for anyone else to see and for light to shine on it all. And for some of us, that is keeping us from faith in Jesus altogether. We're afraid that if we get too close to the light and we allow Jesus to shine on all the things that we've done in the past, then he'll never accept us. But he'll reject us on the spot, and so we stay away from God. Maybe we stay away from church. But if that's what you think, we've misunderstood God. God, through Jesus, doesn't shine light on the dark things in our lives so that he can rub it in our faces, so that he can reject us. He shines that light so that we can be free from it. And you can be free from it this morning through faith in Jesus. Through coming to him as not only the one who shines light in the darkness, but as one who deals with the darkness in our lives, who forgives us for the things that we've done in the past and sets us out on a whole new direction of abundant life in him. And you can receive Jesus this morning and invite him to come in and deal with the darkness in your life, trusting that it is for your good and not your harm that you invite him in. Jesus wants to set you free today. There may be some others of us this morning that would say, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, but there's some dark places in my life that I've been afraid to let Jesus anywhere near. Maybe it's because we know it would mean some lifestyle changes, or it would mean seeking forgiveness from someone else, and we'd just rather leave things alone. Or maybe it would mean confessing something to someone else that we've done, and we're scared and we're afraid. And every time Jesus gets close to that area of our lives and it appears that he might be ready to shine that light on that area of our lives, we run further from him. But please hear me this morning. God is for you, not against you. God has good things planned for you. His plans are to prosper you and not to harm you. You serve a good God. And he wants his light to shine on that dark area of your life so that you can be set free from it. That's it. He knows how it hinders your walk with him. He knows how it hinders your relationships with others. He knows how it is a burden for you to carry around day after day after day, and he wants to set you free. And today there can be freedom. Even if there are some difficult steps or hard decisions you need to make to get that freedom, today there can be freedom. And so this morning, if you are here and you have never allowed the light of Jesus to shine in your life, you've never invited him to come into your life, he is lighting today the pathway to God for you. And he's inviting you to come by faith in him as he restores you to a right relationship with God. And that's something that you can do today before you leave. Come to God through faith in Jesus. Robin will be at the front this morning as we close. And she will be there to pray with you and to talk with you if that's a step that you would like to take. Maybe though you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus and you're struggling with the darkness. You're struggling to allow the light of Jesus to shine on certain areas of your life. I want to invite you to come as well. Robin will be here, and there'll be an opportunity to pray this morning with her. If you would like someone to come alongside of you and pray about a certain area of your life. And maybe you want prayer for something that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about this morning, but you still would like the ministry of prayer. I would invite you to come at the end of the service and to make use of that. So let us pray this morning. God,